just put the notes in here, the natural scale, the so-called. I did this little a keyboard drawing. I'm not very good at drawing, but I think you can relate to, that's a portion of a keyboard. If you look at a piano or like an organ, or this is the basic layout. You see groups of 2 black keys, groups of 3 black keys, 2 and 3, 2. Each one of this portion, it's considered 1 octave, right? In the previous video, we discussed that we have in our Western music system 12 notes. Each one of them has an interval, has a distance of a half step. And after the last one, we start to repeat the same note as the first one, but at a higher pitch. It's double the frequency of that the note we started with. In this case, first day at the piano, you sit down, the teacher will say, you see these 2 black keys, the first white key next to those 2 black keys, it's your C note. So that's how it starts. It's a C, then we have D, E, F, G, A, B. So you will notice that between C and D, we have the C sharp or D flat. We will get into that later. Between D and E, we have the D sharp or E flat. Between E and F, we don't have an accident. So the distance between E and F, it's just a half step. We don't have that interval in between. From F to G, we have an interval in here, which is the F sharp or G flat. Between G and A, the same, G sharp or A flat. Between A and B, A flat, A sharp or B flat, sorry. After B, we will have another C note. It's not, I didn't represent in here, but it will be like this, right? We will have the note right here. And then we will start all over again. 2, then 3, and that will be the continuation of our keyboard. So we have 2 notes that they don't have accidents in between, right? Which is the E, from E to F, there's no accident, and from B back to C, there's no accident. When we go back to this scale, that's why when you're only playing the white keys, it's considered the natural scale, right? It's the C major or C natural. So basically, this is our first scale. It's a major scale or natural scale. So we start at C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and you can go so on and so forth, back to C, D, E, F, G, all natural notes. All of these notes, they're considered in the key of C major or C natural. There's 2 ways to organize those notes, right? When we're playing notes in sequence, one at a time, it creates the idea of scale. If I'm playing this note starting on the C and moving to the next C, for an example, this is called the C Ionian or C major scale. If I'm playing the same notes, but I will start on the next one, I start on the D and I will play all of these notes. You don't need to play all the way to the D, but just as an example, it's called the D Dorian because we're playing the second note in that scale. We're repeating the same notes, but the distance, the interval between those notes as opposed to the first one we're starting, they change because the relationship between our little half steps here, right? We will talk about scales later. What I really want to discuss is like how do we combine these notes to play chords. There's a basic way to learn chords. Once again, most people would do like, oh, this is the C, that's a D, that's a G, that's an E minor. they will memorize those patterns, those shapes, and but they don't understand how were they created, because most of the times you will understand that you have thousands of chords that you're supposed to learn or memorize, and you will never be able to do that, right? If we're talking of chords as group of notes, it makes more sense to me to understand how they are formed, how they're created, than trying to just memorize shapes of chords. And you need to use your brain for something that it's a little more practical, because whatever chord you see represented in a music sheet or in a song that you're learning, you don't need to know all of those chords as long as you know how to create them and find your own way to represent that. And that's kind of what we're going to do here. So basically, the way we group notes for a basic chord, they're called triads, right? So if I'm starting with C, I will consider C my number one. So how do I create a chord having C as the root, C as the foundation, right? As the starting point of that chord. It's all about stacking thirds. So if I take C as my root, as my starting point, I will count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So basically I'm just skipping the even numbers or degrees, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's the 1, 3, 5. In a keyboard, it's pretty easy to understand because all you have to do is play the so-called chicken foot, right? This is a C major chord. So we have C as the root or the starting point, right? That's the letter we'll use to represent that chord, which will be simply this. E as the third degree, it's considered the median, or it's the note that it will help us to understand if that chord it's a major chord or a minor chord, right? And I have some theories to explain why would you call something major or minor later. And then we have the G, which the function of the G is to understand if that chord it's a perfect chord or if it's an altered chord. More about that later as well. So this is our first chord within the key of C major, right? I'm just taking one note as a reference. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the three notes that will create the first chord. And I would do the same starting on the next and the next and the next, so on and so forth. So I will end up with 7 chords within the same key, 7 possibilities, 7 groups of notes where I can play chords, all of them belonging to the same key. So we did the C, that's how we represent the C. Now we will do the same thing, but my starting point right now will be the next one, which is a D. So I will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because D is my new root. It's my new foundation, my new starting point, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, 5. So that's how I will represent this chord. It's a D, but wait. We cross this interval here, right? Where can you guys see it? Let me lock this like this. Okay, so now I'm out of focus, but hopefully it's better for you guys to see it. So remember, between E and F and between B and C, we don't have that accidental note. We don't have the interval. So everything in music, it's about intervals. It's about counting distance, because that's how we measure things, right? I don't know if 1 mile it's a long distance if I don't have something else to compare. Well, 1 mile, it's a lot more than half a mile. It's double, right? So in music's the same. We always have to compare something to something so we can create patterns. We can create templates or formulas to understand what we're doing. So if I count the distance between the C and the E, I have one step here, a whole step, and I have another whole step. So I have two whole steps. I will write like this. Okay? If I measure the D as my next root to the third, which is F, I have a whole step here and I have a half step here. So it's a 1.5 step. So the distance here, it's shorter than the distance here, right? Because this, it's a bigger or a longer distance, you can call major, because this distance, it's smaller, we call it minor, if it makes sense, right? The way to represent a minor interval in a chord, it's simply by adding a little m. And the distance here between the D and the A, it hasn't changed. It's the same distance as between the C and the G, right? Because from here we have a half step and one step, so 1.5. But the whole distance here, it's 3.5 steps, which is the perfect fifth for us. The distance between the D and the A is the same here. F to G, it's one step. G to A, one step. 2 steps. So 2, 1.5, 3.5. So even though the distance here between the foundation, the root, and the third, it's smaller, the distance between the third and the fifth compensates for that. So this distance here, I don't know if it's easy to see, this distance here hasn't changed compared to the distance here. So the fifth, it's moving parallel. It doesn't matter if the note in the center, and that's why we call median, right? The note in the center, in the mid, it can change. It can be 2 steps away from the root, it can be 1.5 away from the root, but the distance between the 1 and the 5, it stays the same to a certain point. So what do we do next? We go to the E. Now E is my next foundation. So E, 1, 2, 3, it's a G, 1, 2, 3, it's a B. So same thing here, right? From E to G, that's the letter to represent that. From E to G, I have a half step, one step. It means that it's a minor interval. So we will call this E minor. From G to B, we have 2 steps. So the distance between E and B, 3.5 steps. Still a perfect chord. Moving on. F, 1, 2, 3, A, 1, 2, 3, it's a B, right? It's a C, sorry. So F to A, 1, 2 whole steps. A to C, 1.5 step. But the distance between F and C is still the same, 3.5 steps. 2 steps here, it's an F major. Then we go to G. G to A, B, 1, 2, 3, D. So between G and B, I have 1, 2 whole steps. It means that it's a G major. From B to D, half step, 1, 1.5, 3.5. It's a perfect chord. A, I will have to kind of kill our little keyboard here. Sorry guys. Here we go. So I will just continue my scale here. I don't need to go longer than here. So next one, it's the A. A, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So A to C I have 1.5, which means that my A chord within this key, it's considered a minor chord. And then from C to D I have 1, 2 whole steps, 3.5. It's a perfect chord. I hope, is that making sense so far? Can you still see it? Okay. Now we go to the B. B, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, F. So from B to D, I have a half step, 1 step. It's 1.5 steps, which means that this B chord, it's a minor chord. And then I have from D to F, I have 1 step here and a half step here. So this is a kind of anomaly, right? Because I have a 1.5 steps, and then I have 1.5 steps. So instead of my perfect fifth interval, which is 3.5 steps, I only have 3 steps here between my root and my fifth. That it's considered the way you can label this chord. It's simply by adding a flat symbol and indicating what degree it's altered, what degree it's not perfect in this case, which is the 5. So the 7th chord in a major key, it's considered to be a minor chord with a flat 5, because this distance here, it's not perfect. So there you have it. We have 7 chords in a key of C, because all of these chords, they were originated based on the scale of C major. C becomes the key, right? The king. And all of the chords, they are just groups of notes that you're picking from the major scale. You're not adding or changing anything to accommodate. Like a B minor will have an F sharp as a perfect fifth, but that doesn't belong to the key of C. So everything we do is combining these 7 notes in ways that it can allow us to have chords, create harmonies, and play scales, play notes on top of those chords. One exercise that is very important, and let me do this really quick. So that's why it's such a small board. So this was just a long way to explain triads. So when we have C, we have basically our chicken foot, and these are the notes: C, E, G. D minor, same thing: D, F, A. E minor, E, G, B. F major, F, A, C. G major, G, B, D. A minor, A, C, E. And our B minor flat 5, which is B, D, and F. So these are the chords. These are the triads that we have, the notes that once we combine those notes together, they represent the chord that it's being written here. And we have ways to play that. You can play them as an arpeggio, which is choosing the notes of the chord, the triad, and playing as a scale. So you play 1 3 5 1 3 5 1 3 5. Or you can combine. You can find these notes in different strings and you can play them together, so these notes can harmonize. They can sound as one sound, right? They can sound as one sound. It's redundant. You get the point. So now I'll go back to the guitar and I want to show you how we can utilize this information to practice and to find the triads and find the chords and why the chords are, if you're already playing them, why you have those positions and those shapes when you're playing the chords. Where did that came from? It came from here, right? So we go back to the guitar right now and I will show you in practical terms how you can create an exercise out of this and how this can help you in the future to improve your playing, memorizing songs and solos and everything, right? So let's get back to the guitar now.